Colleagues, let's return to our online conference. We have our final session, and today in this last session, Alexei Sarvativ will be speaking. He's the head of the BIM implementation project at Level Company. Alexei, well, there's no point in hiding it. Alexei is our former colleague and spent a lot of time with us on the front lines of digital transformation from the consulting side. Now, he leads this work within a major Moscow developer. It will be very interesting to hear about what life is like inside the company and how Alexei sees it. We'll also ask questions about management decisions and other aspects. So, Alexei, I'll probably hand it over to you right away. Let's have a dialogue.
Kirill, thank you for the introduction. Today, my topic is increasing process efficiency in development design using BIM. I'll start with the company I work for. It's the developer Level Group. The company has been on the market since 2016. It's quite large, with 1,300 employees, 23 projects in progress, and over 1 million square meters in design. And importantly, it's among the top 3 employers among large companies, according to Headhunter. This might be useful information for BIM specialists who are ready to take on the most ambitious challenges. And overall, it's number 1 among developers in the rankings. Our project portfolio is mainly concentrated in Moscow. We have 1 project in the Moscow region, and now we are expanding into the regions with St. Petersburg as a priority. There we will also have our projects. And right now, taking this opportunity, there are good prices on apartments at level.ru. Feel free to reach out. A little about myself. I've been involved with BIM for quite a long time, for more than 13 years now. And you could say I was there at the origins of its development in Russia. And let's say I've witnessed both periods of great hope and periods of great disappointment in BIM, as well as minor disappointments too. But in reality, the technology is evolving and it's gradually getting on track. The technology is complex and requires, first and foremost, a high level of organization of internal company processes and highly qualified staff. That, of course, slows down its development. While working consulting before Level, I implemented many successful BIM technology adoption projects in a design and development company. Now, as Kirill mentioned, I am working on this at Level Group. The question today, the topic today is how to increase the efficiency of design processes using BIM. And in trying to find answers to this question, we come to the issue of how to improve the efficiency of BIM by changing the processes themselves. Because as practice shows, and really this probably isn't news, simply implementing some tools doesn't solve the problems that usually exist. And as a result, the effects are either below expectations or BIM brings no benefits at all. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Let's start with our case studies. Today's topic is really about how to slay the dragon or put out fires. At Levels, I can say that overall digitalization and BIM design is one of our strategic priorities. It's one of our strategic priorities, and in fact, it's one of 6, not one of 100. So there aren't that many which really emphasizes the importance of this area for the company. And right now, our main focus is on the chain from issuing working documentation to bringing in the contractor, where we see the main benefits of BIM. Overall, whether it's in the IT department, the development department, or the BIM team, our focus is on achieving tangible results. So when considering the implementation of a new BIM scenario or a new product, we first and foremost assess the potential impact. In other words, to understand what it will bring to the company. And in this case, the effects are quite significant because we are working with a chain that directly affects the project implementation timeline. And as a rule, I think this is the case for all companies. There are delays in deadlines. So to begin with, we want to complete the project within the ambitious timelines we set, and of course to shorten them whenever possible. And as a rule, problems start with the issuance of working documentation. Accordingly, any delay here pushes back the deadlines. Then we calculate the scope of work, and there too certain issues and problems arise, causing us to miss deadlines. And as a result, we conduct the tender and bring in the contractor much later, which leads to a loss of certain profits and project efficiency. Moreover, we can influence the first 2 points with the help of BIM. How? I'll explain further. First of all, we have our own design bureau. Currently, about half of our project portfolio consists of level projects. That's half of the portfolio. And even regardless of BIM, our design bureau demonstrates higher efficiency. For example, firstly, in terms of meeting planned deadlines, it's almost 3 times higher than planned contractual deadlines. The average delay in delivering working documentation is almost 2.5 times lower. We measure these indicators and know them precisely. We use a common data environment, coordination, and all the metrics are, so to speak, transparent. Also, having an in-house design bureau allows us to ensure higher quality models and documentation. Specifically regarding documentation, again, this is a measurable value. It is primarily measured, once again, during the process of handing over the documentation. The number of review iterations is 1.5 times lower. As for the quality of BIM models, since we are constantly developing new scenarios and optimizing our requirements for the models, it's difficult to measure precisely. But the main metric right now is the model's suitability for quantity takeoff. Naturally, with internal projects, we have more opportunities to ensure this level of quality. Also, regarding the specific BIM cases, the Internal Design Bureau allows us to implement new BIM scenarios without increasing the design workload, or with only a minimal increase. This is actually a fundamental approach even when working on automating quantity calculations, which I'll talk about a bit later. Our management set a goal for us. We must automate quantity calculations without increasing the workload. This can be achieved either by optimizing the calculation processes, perhaps, by optimizing the work type directory somewhere, but it can also be done through certain automations that we can implement within our design bureau and accordingly not increase the workload. First of all, let's say we use an element classifier for calculations, and model classification, of course, takes a certain amount of time, even if not a lot, but still, if we are working with an external contractor, any additional requirements for them mean extra costs and deadlines, or both together. So any additional requirement, including model classification. For internal projects, firstly, we can incorporate classifiers into the element libraries that designers use. And also for some current projects where we initially didn't use new families, for example, we can do this with some automation again, practically without spending any effort. On the scale of the project, you could say the labor costs are almost zero. Also, regarding new cases, for example, we have a scenario for generating data from the model for the product and pricing department. And just to clarify, this involves quite a large number of additional parameters in the rooms. For instance, whether a bedroom has an ensuite bathroom. This, for example, affects the price, or say some other additional indicators related to the apartment. Orientation to the cardinal directions, which also affects, among other things, pricing, as well as the floor level. This, again, requires filling in the model parameters. There are actually about 24 of these parameters. We will be able to automate this internally. So you could say the designer just presses a button, receives these parameters for the rooms, we export them, and then use this data for the product department. Accordingly, for an external designer, these are additional requirements. Let's move on. As for design automation, here, as I mentioned, our main focus is meeting deadlines for delivering working documentation because that's where delays start. But at the same time, our team, the BIM team, also faces challenges, tasks, and goals related to design automation aimed at reducing labor costs. Reducing labor costs is firstly about deadlines. There is some correlations there, and overall, it also improves the efficiency of the design office as a whole. So even if we automate a large number of processes and reduce our standard labor costs per project, we will be able, for example, to handle a larger portfolio with the same number of people. I think the math here is generally clear. Also, in our design work, a significant amount of labor costs currently goes into documentation. But it's not just user. I think this is true for everyone, for the entire market. That is, creating the model does take some time, of course, but that is generally offset, for example, by automating the specifications. But it's the actual drafting of the drawings that is a major routine task. And for example, here we developed several plugins that automate, as shown on the slide, the creation of reinforcement sheets for columns where instead of 2 hours per sheet, a designer can now complete one in 20 minutes. And there are about 150 such sheets in a project. So this means we can reduce the time needed to prepare documentation for vertical structures. The same applies to the elevation drawings for curtain walls. In some projects, there are quite a lot of them, and the time savings are about twofold. Openings are a whole separate story because it's actually difficult to measure the real labor costs since it's a highly iterative process involving the exchange and issuance of tasks. In the traditional 2D approach, it requires enormous effort, but with the help of plugin automation, we can reduce these efforts again, and we've already achieved certain successes in this area. Overall, when it comes to BIM in design, I think it's also important to mention, though it's nothing new, that if we look at just the design phase, the benefits of BIM are actually quite limited here. And if we take a separate design bureau as an example, then probably the main benefit of BIM is that the company can get new orders, new contracts, new projects from clients who require BIM. Of course, the choice is not only based on the quality of BIM modeling, you also need to be able to design well and create interesting projects. But nevertheless, this is also an important aspect. A model is created in it, but still the main benefits are achieved through the use of the model when we have already generated this data and can apply it. Let me tell you a bit about automating quantity calculations. This is actually the first case where we use data from the BIM model. It's the automation of quantity takeoff. And here, probably the key point is that many mistakenly believe that a model element can be equated to a type of work in the quantity schedule. And that's often not the case. Of course, maybe at some early conceptual stages, you can directly link them one-to-one. But when it comes to tender schedules, it usually doesn't work that way. And our task here comes down to the fact that we need to convert data from one type object-oriented data, that is data from model elements, into the structure of our quantity takeoff schedule. This is usually done with the help of specialized software. That is, we need to take parameters from the model, process them logically or mathematically in some way, and accordingly use these parameters to determine which work or material a particular element belongs to. And essentially, we need to transfer data from one structure to another. So what does this usually look like? In the classic scenario, we have a model. We have working documentation that is generated from the model. And typically, the production and technical department prepares a bill of quantities based on the documentation. Naturally, without using the model, they rely on drawings and specifications, and this usually takes quite a long time. And importantly, not all the data is always directly available in the documentation. So sometimes this requires some. Previously, I've come across cases where masonry was calculated based on hatching in AutoCAD. Well, I think you've encounter this too, right? Of course, we don't have that situation. In any case, we have a model in Isworks where you can check, but still it's manual work. And now our main project is automating the calculation of quantities, which affects the chain I mentioned earlier. And here we can get the data directly from the model. But when it comes to processes, it's important to ensure synchronization between the documentation and the bill of quantities. Because if we don't do this, we'll end up with one set of data in the working documentation and slightly different data from the model. This can easily happen if we create some kind of time lag, right? For example, if documentation is delivered earlier and the model comes later, and for some reason, say collisions were being resolved or something else was being done, the model changed, and then discrepancies will arise. Naturally, we'll spend time trying to find them, and in the end, most likely the effect of automation will just disappear. It simply won't be there. Also, regarding process-related matters, which are also important. For automation to work, it's important for us to ensure, well, first of all, we have certain entities. There's a library of elements from which the model is created, and there are internal design standards. That is, there are certain materials, yes, some standard structures that we use in projects layered assemblies, for example. And there are directories of types of work and materials. So accordingly, what kind of issues can arise? And we also encounter this when automating this process. For example, a model comes in for calculation, we do the calculations, but at the same time, some characteristics in the model or in the project are not defined. So as a result, the construction engineer has to go and clarify these characteristics. This takes time. And even if we assume that the calculation is done completely at the push of a button without any issues, and we have a perfect model, we still spend time on some kind of interaction. And as a result, the effect, again, is reduced. And it's important for us to synchronize these entities with each other in terms of process. For example, one of the things we're working on is synchronizing the addition of new materials to directories and libraries. Right now, we are in the process of implementing library management software. And accordingly, we plan that adding an element to the library as a designer's request will automatically create the material in the materials directory. Well, the materials directory, that is, if we're talking about an element, that's it. And then once we synchronize these things, when we no longer waste time during the calculation of the work volume report, we can actually achieve the level of efficiency that is technically possible. Because I lost some important thought. Yes, we can really achieve much greater efficiency because right now, in fact, when we calculate the work volume report, we run into these kinds of process-related issues. And in conclusion, probably to sum up my presentation, I think we'll have some kind of discussion next, right? I'm sure there are things to clarify. Automation is actually only possible, and its benefits can only be realized if we work directly with the processes. That is, BIM as a technology requires a high level of process organization. So if we don't work on this and just think that by adopting the tools, they'll solve our problems, that's not how it works. That can be said with confidence. Well, I think that's all from me. I'm ready for further discussion.
I've actually accumulated a lot of questions in the chat.
Let's go them.
Actually, I suggest we start from the end. Here's a question from the chat about operations. So you talk about the design stage, about the stage of calculating volumes, but when it comes to operations, do you have some kind of management company?
Yes, we have our own management company. And actually, in our target vision, we expect that the data, specifically the as-built data model, will be transferred to the operations department. But for now, we are still at the strategy stage.
For the future?
Planning, yes.
A foundation for the future.
Of course. And in addition, I'd say that overall, the automation of a WOOF is just a small part of the entire process and probably the starting point. Because by automating the calculation of volumes, you can also automate the calculation of costs.
The word strategy was mentioned.
Yes.
Today, too, it's not the first time, Vasily, that Sberbank has been mentioned, and there is a document adopted within Sberbank. How are your goals and objectives formalized? I mean, obviously, it's not just a single slide with the stages of a development project's life cycle. How did you approach this issue?
Well, for us, actually, the BIM team as a whole does have certain goals. These goals are focused on business outcomes. That is actually, for example, the reduction of AUFO goal is not just to do it in general, but to achieve certain reductions compared to current indicators, compared to internal standards. So accordingly, the focus is entirely on business outcomes. Regarding the strategy, we don't have an approved strategy yet. It's still in development. And I think it's a matter of 1 or 2 months before we finalize our target vision for the entire process of using BIM data. So what I just mentioned are pieces of this strategy. Naturally, the strategy is based on certain target indicators within specific processes. So once again, we start from the business side, from the effects we want to achieve. And then personally, based on my experience, I like the approach of breaking down BIM into scenarios. A scenario is a certain process based on a specific method that produces particular effects. So in a way, we package a potential case into this scenario with its potential effect. So we have high-level goals, which can vary. They might be based on business metrics or perhaps on an overall digitalization strategy, including the integration of processes with each other. And from there, we determine which scenarios we will use to achieve these goals and how these scenarios should interact with each other, which is also very important. Because I'll give a detailed answer if that's all right. Because basically, again, in my experience, you can't implement BIM correctly if you haven't seen the whole picture. Because we can easily, if we start automating a WOOF without seeing the end goal, maybe there are some further uses of the data, including configurations later when we move on to the next scenarios. We'll realize that we did something wrong here. And in order to implement things here, we'll have to either change something or even completely redo what was done before. And this connection is very important.
A painful topic.
At the very least, the strategy needs to be worked out.
Yes, I see. I saw you had 2 slides about BIM and design. Talking about this in 2025 might seem strange already, but nevertheless, if we look at some reports on the adoption of information modeling technology in development design, the numbers are still nowhere near 99% even now. Accordingly, some of the issues you solve with the help of your in-house designer are related to parameterization, which is necessary for your future scenarios. And some of the issues are completely general. Am I right in understanding that the effects you showed on one of your previous slides, where the in-house designer demonstrates very high efficiency, are achieved in BIM, including thanks to this automation? Can this be considered beneficial, right? And, used as an example to improve the efficiency of any external market designer?
Actually, I think that automation here only partially has an impact, simply because since the moment we implemented some solutions, there hasn't yet been any cumulative effect from these changes. So, for example, the solution was implemented to say, assemble kits for vertical structures, those examples I showed, but accordingly, the projects need to reach that stage. So in some cases, we've already applied this, and in fact, much of it has a delayed cumulative effect. That's when I think, in the end, automation will have an impact going forward. And overall, it will simply affect our key performance indicators in terms of timelines. So if we realize that we're working much faster, we'll just set more ambitious deadlines for design. And there, it's more about organizing the work, since the internal project team can start earlier, yes. It's easier for us to resolve some contractual issues after all, since we're within the same company. Got it, thank you.
But in your opinion, what are perhaps the key factors for success? And, well, the numbers you're showing for the design block for the project division, they seem quite good to me. So, in your professional opinion, what are the absolutely crucial and fundamental key factors that truly contribute to and make up this remarkable success? the specific elements that consistently lead to achieving such impressive and significant numbers, and ultimately contribute to the overall success and exceptional efficiency of your department? Is it a complex combination of several interconnected things, or what exactly is the underlying principle?
Actually, here I'll draw a parallel with BIM design, right? So, for example, if I understood the question correctly, we have the option of working with an external contractor or with an internal design bureau. And in the case of an external contractor, what does our work boil down to? We need to periodically monitor the progress of the model creation, right? For example, you need to make sure that the contractor is actually designing in BIM and not just having some students or a subcontractor create the model separately somewhere else. Right. So control is necessary. And in terms of some kind of oversight, I think that an in-house design bureau, including from a BIM perspective, is more transparent, and we can identify potential issues much earlier, whether with the models or otherwise, and respond to them accordingly. That's probably the key point.
So better manageability of the process. And what about the plugins if it's not a secret? How many of those do you have? These are your own developments, the ones you write for yourselves?
Yes.
So how many are there? You showed 3 key ones, or at least highlighted 3 main ones. Are there many more?
A lot is still in development. We have, let's say, a well-known line of plugins for small routine operations. I probably won't name it but it covers some basic tasks for designers, like copying sheets or something else, those kinds of things that actually have a significant impact. And accordingly, when developing a plugin, we basically understand well, we have an idea of how long it takes to complete a particular set or a specific task within the development of a set. For example, like here, as an example, preparing sheets for columns. Naturally, when developing a set for vertical structures, we have such a process and we know how much time it takes within the development of the set. So accordingly, we estimate what automation will provide. If it proves effective over a certain period, if it makes sense to develop it, then we go ahead and do it and later measure its impact on current projects. Of course, sometimes the effect doesn't show up right away. That is, let's say the first version of the plugin was given. The designers tried it, some comments. There is no effect, but we understand that it will be on the next project when, yes, that is here, as I said earlier, that the deferred effect truly takes place.
I understand. There's a last question about plugins, and are you planning to maybe sell them in the future? Well, maybe it's something developments that you want to share, or are there plans to share them? Are there any such plans at all? Or is it more like...
For now, we're still thinking about it. Actually, to be honest, when we encountered this, I've been working at Level for a year. And before joining Level, I had moved away from BIM design a bit and was working more with development, with BIM. I discovered something interesting. In general, there's actually a lot you can buy, like from a well-known plugin store, and there's a big selection that covers some basic needs. So really, there are no problems at all. But if you want to buy something serious, like from a store, let's call it, that there just isn't anything like that. Either companies don't sell their solutions, meaning they use them internally. I mean, solutions like the ones I'm showing here, right? Some truly serious tools that handle engineering calculations. Yes, for example, there's Tesla BIM for map, there's BIM Step for software design. These are really major solutions that in certain areas can significantly reduce development time and make it more or less manageable in Revit. Well, you can't just buy something like that. Or even if someone is ready to make an offer, we understand that to integrate this solution into our product, we'd have to change everything in our processes, meaning we'd need to change templates, families, because everything is tailored for that. In other words, the plugins were not originally designed to allow for any variability. So accordingly, if we consider bringing our solutions to market, the ones we develop, we'll face the same question: how can these plugins be applied? How much effort will it take to adapt them, to make them universal? How many could we potentially sell? And at what price should we sell them? If it turns out to be economically viable, then of course it makes sense. If not, then I wouldn't pursue it. Thank you. Here's the question verbatim. How do you manage to synchronize the interactions between the PTO staff working with this model and the external designer if the parameters are incomplete? And how do you avoid delays in the function that the PTO specialist performs in this process? The method here is actually quite simple. On the one hand, it's control. Well, I mean, it's clear that there's really no way to fully protect yourself here, even with something as basic as issuing working documentation on time. All clients try to monitor some kind of progress, but still mistakes can occur in the documentation. Mistakes mean additional iterations, and that, again, leads to extra time needed for approvals. As a rule, in most cases, everyone tries to cooperate and make an effort, right? So ultimately, it all comes down to contractual obligations on the client side, first and foremost, not just requests or favors, like asking to do something urgently. There's no other way to do it. As for the interaction with the production and technical department, well, first of all, we check the model, that is, we accept the model, and only after that do we start calculating the bill of quantities. Of course, some issues still come up from time to time, and we fix those as we go.
Well, I remember you had a slide on this topic, which I think partially answers the question. That is the information requirements that need to be met. And the checks you're talking about aren't just at the end, but also include monitoring and checking during the process. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, it turns out.
So basically it's constant, like, for example, exporting your models or shared intermediate data, say once a week or once every 2 weeks. And again, if you really put your mind to it, you could, for example, set up some automation so that reports are generated, aggregated into a dashboard, and you can monitor what's happening in them without opening the model itself, roughly speaking. Because if there are a lot of projects, a lot of models, of course, you could create a huge BIM team, but BIM team also means certain expenses for the company. So here you need to automate as much as possible. By the way, we're also working in this direction so that, we can minimize the involvement of our own resources as well, more efficiently.
From the perspective of the process of obtaining quantity takeoffs, which you also mentioned, does this somehow change or transform the process that existed before BIM and in the BIM era, let's say, for the work group or the group of companies? And how critical are these changes? Have any new roles or people appeared? Did the existing staff have to learn anything new, or is this a fully automated process where you just press a button and get the final result?
Overall, the processes as a whole, the order of operations remain the same. That is, our documentation receives a production stamp, and accordingly, there is a model attached to the documentation, and both are then handed over as a task to the production planning department.
And I apologize, I also noticed this on the slide. Is this the RD stage?
Yes.
It's not the P stage, not the tender stage. It's RD.
The monolithic and masonry work is at the P stage. All other sections, engineering, facades, transparent structures are at the working documentation stage.
Got it.
Yes. The P stage, accordingly, usually after the expert review, when there are no more changes, that's when the monolithic work is calculated. Then, with an additional agreement, it's updated when the working documentation appears, including the volume for reinforcement. That's our process. In terms of process changes, from the perspective of process changes, they haven't changed significantly overall. So for the PTO department, it's about mastering new tools that enable automated calculations. And the work is now more about overseeing those calculations, right? In other words, identifying any issues. That is visually checking which elements have been assigned which tasks. Has every element been assigned a task? Ideally, of course, this should be resolved at the model review stage, but it always happens that we miss something or some materials are missing. So in this respect, the process hasn't changed. The only thing is, of course, we're looking at ways to optimize this process. For example, is the ability to calculate based on the model without waiting for the stamp, just as an example. But for this, once again, the process needs to be properly organized. For example, with internal projects, we can ensure this at least. This is another additional case where the model is fully developed. And then we're simply preparing the drawings, while at the same time we can already use the model to calculate quantities. But at the same time, of course, we need to make sure that it definitely won't change anymore, because otherwise we'll end up with discrepancies between the working documentation and the bill of quantities.
Again, it's all about this same process. The directory of work types and accordingly the element classifier is a kind of work that, in our experience, always stirs up a lot of departments within the company. And coordinating this directory so that it's suitable for different functional tasks like procurement or tendering is always a collective, collegial effort. And as I understand it, you're doing this work precisely in such a way that it's convenient for everyone.
Yes, actually, we do have a directory, and it's a pretty good one. In other words, our colleagues have done a lot of work. So, in fact, our directory is currently going through this entire cycle right now. So we compile the bill of quantities within the context of the directory, and we also monitor the cost price, again, according to the directory. And the bill of quantities is also sent to the tender, and based on it, we accordingly close out the work for the contractor. That's it. So the process here is absolutely transparent. And by the way, it is digitized on our end. The only thing is that for now, our model ends at the calculation of quantities. So in the target vision, of course, we see that it will be used further, but in this process, it stops here.
This involvement and digitalization, of course, once again, stir up the departments responsible for approvals when it comes to approving the directory. They most likely, if we are talking about the majority of cases we encounter, at first show some resistance, yes, to changing the usual way of doing things. And overcoming this resistance without the involvement and strategic decision of top management that we are moving in this direction is quite difficult. Today, I think there was something mentioned from Sberbank about strategy in the previous presentation. Yes, they also talked about how without the support of leadership of the top executive, a lot of things just don't work. How are things with that in your organization? How does that manifest itself? How does it affect the digitalization process, let's call it that in general?
Yes, our top management fully supports and believes in digitalization and BIM. As I mentioned a bit earlier, it is one of our strategic priorities. And I can say for myself that I am confident we will meet these expectations, meaning we will achieve the benefits of BIM. And accordingly, this will have an impact on certain business metrics of specific processes. So there is complete support here.
Excellent, indeed it is. I probably have a short question about the directory. There was also a question from Vasily about the classifier and the codifier regarding the size of the directory. How extensive is it? You mentioned that it was developed by your team. I don't know, maybe you have some numbers. Do you know how long it took you to develop it? Or if not, how big is the directory overall?
I can't say how much or how long it took to develop. Actually, it was developed even before I joined the company. The size of the directory, well, it's constantly being updated. We also do some optimization work here and there. So it's probably around 10,000 entries. That is jobs and materials.
So you have materials in there?
Yes, materials are included as a separate category.
Well, these are probably the main ones, right?
Well, not just the main ones. There are also a lot of engineering materials and quite a few finishing materials as well. But actually, the main volume is made up of engineering and finishing materials. So for monolithic work, masonry and facades, there aren't that many materials.
Perhaps you could kindly tell us, when we extensively discuss the crucial aspects of cost estimation and the significant role of automation, there is indeed a very substantial and important section that specifically involves the comprehensive development of the detailed reference guide. And Kirill asked about how it went, how the process unfolded. But how labor-intensive was the next part, specifically the automation of this calculation process? How quickly and effectively did people truly learn this, and how soon after that did they actually start generating the complete bill of quantities directly from the model? Could you talk a bit about that as well?
Well, actually, considering I already had experience solving such tasks, it took about 2 or 3 months to automate the calculation process and get the first results, especially for engineering. which is usually the most problematic area for everyone. The main focus there is on materials, right? So the entire model of the engineering systems consists of various equipment, valves, fittings, and so on. And the main issue there is just the large amount of nomenclature. If we're talking about automating the entire process as a whole, what I'm referring to is that it's important to synchronize many things with each other to set up the process. And again, synchronizing the model and documentation, this already takes much more time. We still haven't achieved the ideal situation in this area. In fact, I personally still see many ways to optimize and automate things. For example, there could be some kind of automatic calculation of models after approval. So something like that.
That is, the process of automation would start to look different in certain parts.
So the work would come down to the PTO engineer would be able to focus specifically on checking the volumes they receive without wasting time on technical issues.
Well, I see our time is coming to an end. Yes, our program is wrapping up. I think we'll be finishing up this segment with you. Thank you very much, Alexei. Best of luck to you on your journey. Although it seems to me that in your case, in your hands, it's not about luck, everything will turn out well.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
So to sum up, probably in relation to the conference topic about the Dragon, actually we know what it looks like. We haven't quite got up to it yet, but still we know what it looks like and we're following its trail. I think that after some time this Dragon of digitalization, we will defeat it.
Absolutely. Well, actually, yes, and
that too.
Actually, I think this is the leitmotif of our entire conference today because, well, we started with a certain description of how challenging the times are now in development, and we talked about that, described what possible prospects there are, like entering regional markets, and discussed many different things. But today's speakers, in fact, I think, showed that people who know what they're doing and what they want to achieve, and who put that into practice in their work, no matter whether times are tough or easy, always reach their goals, see results, and achieve outcomes. And as Alexei said in the last presentation, he's also confident that this will be useful. Thank you very much for being with us all this time. Then, until we meet again, goodbye.
Thank you.